Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today we are going to discuss about Indian indenture system, a form of slavery. The Indian indenture system was a system of indentured servitude, by which more than 1.6 million workers from India were transported to labor in European colonies, as a substitute for slave labor, following the abolition of the trade in the early 19th century. The system expanded after the abolition of slavery in the British Empire in 1833, in the French colonies in 1848, and in the Dutch Empire in 1863. British Indian indentureship lasted till the 1920s. This resulted in the development of a large Indian diaspora in the Caribbean, Natal, modern-day South Africa, East Africa, Reunion, Mauritius, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Fiji, as well as the growth of Indo-Caribbean, Indo-African, Indo-Fijian, Indo-Malaysian, and Indo-Singaporean populations. On January 18, 1826, the government of the French Indian Ocean island of Réunion laid down terms for the introduction of Indian laborers to the colony. Each man was required to appear before a magistrate and declare that he was going voluntarily. This agreement is known as Gurmat, and it outlined a period of 5 years' labor in the colonies with pay of 8 rupees per month, which was about $4 in 1826, and rations, provided laborers had been transported from Pondicherry and Karaikal. By 1838, 25,000 Indian laborers had been shipped to Mauritius. The Indian indenture system was put in place initially at the behest of sugar planters in colonial territories, who hoped the system would provide reliable cheap labor similar to the conditions under slavery. As soon as the new system of emigration of labor became known, a campaign similar to the anti-slavery campaign sprang up in Britain and British India. On August 1, 1838, a committee was appointed to inquire into the export of Indian labor. It heard reports of abuses of the new system. On May 29, 1839, overseas manual labor was prohibited, and any person affecting such emigration was liable to a 200 rupee fine or 3 months in jail. After prohibition, a few Indian laborers continued to be sent Mauritius via Pondicherry, a French enclave in South India. However, immigration was authorized again in 1842 to Mauritius, and in 1845 to the West Indies. European planters in Mauritius and the Caribbean worked hard to overturn the ban, while the Anti-Slavery Committee worked just as hard to uphold it. The government of the East India Company, listening to European planters and their supporters, permitted emigration from Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras to Mauritius, on December 2, 1842. Emigration agents were appointed at each departure point. After the lifting of the ban, the first ship left Calcutta for Mauritius on January 23, 1843. During 1843, 30,218 male and 4,307 female indentured immigrants entered Mauritius. The existing regulations failed to stamp out abuses of the system, which continued, including recruitment by false pretenses. Once in the colonies, they were subjected to harsh working conditions on plantations, mines, and construction projects. Many suffered from abuse, maltreatment, and inadequate living conditions. The living conditions for these laborers were often deplorable. They lived in cramped quarters, lacked proper sanitation, and suffered from diseases. The work was grueling and exhausting, with long hours in challenging environments. The repatriation of Indians who had completed indenture remained a problem, with a high death rate, and investigations revealed that regulations for the return voyages were not being satisfactorily followed. There were also some other abuses, like, the sugar colonies were able to devise labor laws that were disadvantageous to the immigrants. For example, in Demerara, or modern-day Guyana, an ordinance in 1864 made it a crime for a laborer to be absent from work, misbehaving or not completing 5 tasks each week. New labor laws in Mauritius in 1867 made it impossible for time-expired laborers to shake free of the estate economy. They were required to carry passes, which showed their occupation and district, and anyone found outside his district was liable to arrest and dispatched immigration depot. If he was found to be without employment, he was deemed a vagrant. After the end of slavery, the European-led West Indian sugar colonies tried the use of emancipated slaves. All these efforts failed to satisfy the labor needs of the colonies. On November 16, 1844, the British Indian government legalized emigration to Jamaica, Trinidad and Guyana. The first ship, the Whitby, sailed from Port Calcutta for British Guiana on January 13, 1838, and arrived in Berbice on May 5, 1838. Importing indentured labor became viable for plantation owners because newly emancipated slaves refused to work for low wages. This is demonstrated in the sheer number of freed slaves in colonies that imported Indian workers. Jamaica had 322,000 while British Guiana and Barbados had about 90,000 and 82,000 freed slaves, respectively. There was also a political incentive to the British import of foreign workers. The influx of Indian workers diminished the competitive leverage and bargaining power of the freed slaves, marginalizing their position within the so-called plantocracy system persisting in the British colonies. The European planters pressed consistently for longer indentures. In an effort to persuade laborers to stay on, the Mauritius government, in 1847, offered a gratuity of £2 to each laborer who decided to remain in Mauritius and renounce his claim to a free passage. The Mauritius government also wanted to discontinue the return passage, and finally on August 3, 1852, the government of British India agreed to change the conditions whereby if a passage was not claimed within 6 months of entitlement, it would be forfeited, but with safeguards for the sick and poor. A further change in 1852 stipulated that laborers could return after 5 years, contributing $35 towards the return passage but would qualify for a free return passage after 10 years. This had a negative effect on recruitment as few wanted to sign up for 10 years and a sum of $35 was prohibitive, thus the change had to be discontinued after 1858. The success of the Indian indenture system for the British, at a terrible human cost, did not remain unnoticed. Other European plantation owners began setting up agents in India to recruit manpower. For instance, French sugar colonies hired labor via the French ports in India without knowledge of the British authorities. By 1856, the number of laborers in Réunion, a French colony, is estimated to have reached 37,694. It was not until July 25, 1860 that France was officially permitted by the British authorities to recruit labor for Réunion at a rate of 6,000 annually. This was extended on July 1, 1861 with permission to import laborers into the French colonies of Martinique, Guadeloupe and French Guiana, or Cayenne. Danish plantation owners also began importing Indian workers to St. Croix. Following introduction of a new labor laws, indenture was extended to the smaller British Caribbean islands, like Grenada in 1856, St. Lucia in 1858 and St. Kitts and St. Vincent in 1860. Emigration to Natal, modern-day South Africa, was approved on August 7, 1860, and the first ship from Madras arrived in Durban on November 16, 1860, forming the basis of the Indian South African community. The recruits were employed on 3-year contracts. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, an Indian National Congress leader, tabled a bill in the Viceroy Legislative Council to end the export of indentured labor to Natal, present-day South Africa, in February 1910. The bill passed unanimously and came to effect in July 1911. However, the British-led Indian indenture system for other colonies finally ended in 1917. According to The Economist, when the Imperial Legislative Council finally ended indenture because of pressure from Indian nationalists and declining profitability, rather than from humanitarian concerns. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video informative, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next video.